In 2019, games sold on the PlayStation were 45% digital and 55% physical across the world. Now, it's fair to say this is quite an even split, with physical sales selling slightly more. But as of Q1 2024, this has risen to 80% digital. Now, these sales have been rising each year on all consoles, but what exactly does this mean? Well, it means that the demand for physical media is on the decline. But are we destined for a digital-only world? I'm Senor Donor, and today we'll be looking at the past, present and future of console gaming and the impact of digital media. It's the 10th of September 2024. I'm at work and get a notification on my phone that Sony have revealed the PS5 Pro. I'd been waiting for this news all year and was excited to check it out. A minute later I was massively disappointed as Sony had decided to remove the disk drive. This meant that my collection and this piece of hardware were incompatible, but this meant much more. It was then that I realised that console gaming was heading in one direction. The new Xbox Series S had gone digital and the PlayStation was following suit. Let's first take a look into the past and what the console gaming market used to look like in the late 90s and early 2000s. More specifically, the sixth generation of consoles. The sixth generation of consoles kicked off with the Dreamcast in 1998, followed by the PS2, GameCube and the original Xbox. Back then, the only way to purchase games was to buy a physical copy, and this would most likely mean a visit to your local game store, supermarket, or pretty much any type of general store. You see, back in the early 2000s, it was common for shops to have a gaming section, even if it was a small one. It was also on the sixth generation that really introduced online gaming to the console player base. On November 12, 2002, Microsoft launched Xbox Live. Now, this was an online subscription service that let users play with others around the world, as well as download new content on their hard drive. After 2 months of Xbox Live launching, over 250,000 people had subscribed. Now, this early version of Xbox Live would only let gamers buy additional content for their games, like new levels, maps and characters, in other words, DLC. You still needed the physical disc to play any game during this generation of consoles, but gamers had now been introduced to digital stores to expand their games even further. It's also worthy to note that the version of a game you purchased, it was final. If it had bugs or performance issues, it was going to stay that way because there was no day one patches back then. The seventh generation of consoles were far more uniformed with their approach to digital storefronts. All consoles had access to an Ethernet or Wi-Fi connection, with some of these requiring an adapter, but this was now a standard. These consoles consisted of the PS3, Xbox 360, as well as the Nintendo Wii. All three of these consoles' digital stores now sold full games as opposed to just demos and DLC, but these were mostly games from earlier generations of consoles and not AAA new releases. Apps for digital media could also be downloaded like Netflix, Hulu and Zune. Although these consoles allowed you to watch DVDs and Blu-ray media, digital streaming platforms were on the rise and very popular. Now, the sixth and seventh generation of consoles set the foundations for digital gaming, but they weren't quite there yet. They were truly the last gen of consoles where physical games were required. So let's go ahead and fast forward into the modern age. In 2024, you're now able to purchase all of your games digitally on all platforms. AA and lower budget game studios release their titles exclusively on digital storefronts, and as a game reviewer, a large majority of the games that I've looked at are digital only, but this is quite common for indie games and understandable due to their much smaller budgets. But some larger game studios that could be considered AAA have opted for digital only releases. Alan Wake 2, Hellblade 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Like a Dragon Gaiden, and hell, even Hi-Fi Rush, these are some examples that could only be purchased digitally at launch. Some studios release their games digitally first and then release a physical copy at a later date. Now, these physical copies will typically be a collector's edition and set you back a few more dollars. Another popular method is by using a third-party distributor. Limited Run Games is a popular example. Now, I'm going to use the PlayStation digital sales from Q1 of 2024 as a reference point, as some data includes PC sales and I don't want to muddy the data. You can see here that 80% of sales were digital, and over the last few years their percentage has hovered around the low 60s to high 70s. If we go back to 2022, Games Industry carried out a financial report on the gaming market. Now, this revealed that the console market sales were 72% digital and 28% physical. PlayStation, Xbox and Nintendo were a part of these figures. A year later in 2023, Games Industry ran the same report again, and digital sales had increased to 83% digital. Now, these reports typically release in December, so I don't have 2024's numbers yet, but I think it's fair to assume these numbers will rise again. Before we look into what the future holds for console gaming, let's take a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of both physical and digital media. Starting off with physical games, the first advantage is that you can take them anywhere. If you're going to a friend's house or using another console, you can play the game immediately. You can also sell your copy and recoup some of the money you paid for it. You can build a physical collection, and there's no need to worry about internet connections unless of course you're gaming online. And finally, the prices are completely subjective. Prices can vary as you can purchase used copies and can potentially get better deals. We'll use Persona 5 Royal as an example. If you wanted to buy it digitally, this would cost you £50, or you could buy a physical copy for half the price. With that said, let's take a look at some of the disadvantages. So the first one is one that I can relate to, as physical games can be lost. When I moved out from my parents' place several years ago, my entire Pokemon collection was lost, and I'm talking every single game from Generation 1 to Generation 3. Consoles for physical media typically cost more, which is understandable as more parts are required. But the biggest con that we can all relate to are discs being damaged or scratched. My Xbox 360 ruined so many discs back in the day. When I was a kid, I didn't always put the discs back in the box, and they'd get scratched and would no longer play. A friend of mine accidentally stood on a copy of Fallout 4 when I just got it, and the disc was smashed to pieces. So what about digital? Well, you can buy them instantly, and you won't have to travel to get them or wait for them to be delivered. They take up no room in the home, you can pay for services that give you access to a library of games, like Game Pass, and digital consoles are cheaper and you'll never need to worry about losing a disc. One of the biggest cons of digital media is that you don't truly own the game, and let me expand on that further. Now, some will argue that you only own the license to play the game, whether it's physical or digital, and that is true. But if you have a physical version, you have a permanent physical license in the form of that disc. If the game is ever delisted from a digital storefront, you can't play it anymore, but the company still keeps your money. You won't be able to resell your games, it's slightly harder to share them, but not impossible, and finally, you'll be at the mercy of your internet connection. Your own preferences will shape what you believe to be the superior choice. I want to remain unbiased in this section, and if you believe I've missed anything out, let me know in the comments. We'll now move on to the final section of the video, where I'll discuss the future of console gaming, as well as provide my opinion. Gone are the days of midnight releases. If you're unfamiliar with this concept, you used to be able to wait outside of a store until midnight, and then pick up a physical copy of the game. When I was a kid, I forgot to pre-order GTA Vice City. I had to wait for several weeks whilst all the kids at school were having the time of their lives. Now, I've always been a physical collector of games and avoided digital copies, but ironically, my point of view has changed quite significantly this year. My reason for buying physical copies was to show that I actually owned a piece of software to display a visual collection. I used to pay more money to get a hard copy of a game and think that provided me with more value. But now if a digital copy is cheaper, I'll just buy that one instead, whereas last year I would have never done that. After building my first PC in June, buying games on Steam became second nature. It's then that I noticed I'm just as happy with a digital collection as I am with my physical copies. I'm now in a place where I don't mind which copy I purchase, and will typically go with whichever's cheaper or whatever has better features. With my background out of the way, let's move on to the finale and what I believe will happen to physical media going forward. With the data that we currently have, I believe console gaming will be completely digital. Each year the number of digital sales rises and the demand for physical based media decreases. Sony and Xbox have made it clear that this drive is no longer a necessity, which is demonstrated by the release of their new consoles. However, don't expect this to happen soon. The physical gaming market contributes $9.5 billion per year. It would not be logical to make the next generation of consoles digital, as companies would lose 5% of their revenue. And when you're talking about billions of dollars, yes, 5% is too big of a number to simply shrug off. And the big three companies in Sony, Microsoft and Nintendo will continue to make physical copies until they're no longer profitable. As it stands in 2024, the physical market is still profitable. Digital sales will continue to dominate the market, but physical still has its place, at least for the time being. To all those that made it to the end of the video, thank you very much for watching. Are you a physical or digital collector, or are you somewhere in between? If you've got any ideas for future videos, I'd love to hear them. And remember, ladies and gents, I'll never be a real YouTuber until I've released an apology video. Or two. That's all, guys. Peace out.